welcome to the debate. In 1987, Michael Jackson stood in his bathroom, took a bar of soap, and wrote a number on his mirror. 100 million.
Which is, the exact number of copies he demanded his next album sell.
Exactly. It was an impossible figure. He was already standing on top of the world. 5 years earlier, Thriller had fundamentally reshaped global culture.
Yeah.
It shattered the MTV color barrier, rewrote the rules of the entire music industry, and moved an unfathomable 70 million copies. So he didn't need to prove anything to anyone.
Right.
Yet he returned to defend his crown with his 7th studio album, Bad. And, well, to some, that number on the mirror was the ultimate battle cry of a pop genius, taking total control of his empire. But to me, Bad is his absolute creative peak. It's a pop manifesto where he mastered bleeding-edge technology to engineer this flawless, world-dominating product.
And I look at that exact same number on the mirror, and I see, the exact moment his reality began to fracture.
Really?
Yes. That isn't healthy ambition. That is a symptom of just crushing, inescapable psychological pressure. Bad documents a really dark, paranoid era. It's the sound of a man hiding his crumbling identity and this profound isolation behind, frankly, a militaristic wall of heavy makeup, buckles, and cold synthesizers.
Well, to understand why I see this as a triumph rather than a tragedy, you have to look at the transition of power that happened behind the scenes. Because Michael essentially emancipated himself.
From Quincy.
Right. For Off the Wall and Thriller, he was brilliant, obviously, but he was operating heavily under Quincy Jones's guidance at Westlake Studios. Quincy was the architect.
Mm-hmm.
But for Bad, Michael wrote 9 of the 11 tracks himself. He left Quincy's comfort zone, set up shop at his home studio in Havenhurst, and built his own team of engineers and musicians. The B team, including John Barnes and Bill Bottrell.
Yeah, but look at how they changed the sound. It wasn't just, a new studio. It was a total rejection of the warmth that made him so beloved in the first place.
Because he was pivoting the entire technological landscape of pop. He moved away from those organic, analog sounds and fully embraced the razor-sharp precision of digital FM synthesis.
Right, the new gear.
Exactly. He brought in these exorbitantly expensive machines like the Fairlight CMI and the Synclavier.
Let's break that down for a second, though, because that shift from analog to digital, that's the core of my argument here. How does that technology actually work?
Well, with the analog synthesizers they used on Thriller, you're dealing with continuous electrical voltages. Think of it like sculpting with warm clay.
Yeah.
You're physically shaping a sound wave, which gives it a very rich, human, almost breathing quality. But digital FM synthesis, which powered the Synclavier, doesn't use voltage.
It's all math.
Right. It uses mathematical algorithms to generate sound. You aren't molding clay anymore. You are cutting glass with a laser. The sound is incredibly sharp, aggressive, and perfectly precise.
Exactly. Cutting glass with a laser. That mathematical, metallic coldness, it was completely intentional. You praise it as innovation, but I see it as him building a fortress.
A fortress?
Yes. The music became heavily percussive and deeply paranoid. He didn't want the warmth of human breath in the tracks anymore. He wanted a machine. And honestly, you cannot separate that cold, algorithmic sound from his physical transformation during this exact same window.
You're talking about the vitiligo.
The vitiligo changing his skin tone, sure, but also the escalating facial surgeries. The wardrobe shifting entirely to black leather, metal straps, and buckles. He was engineering a superhuman militaristic mask.
Oh, come on, that was fashion.
Put up a wall of digital machinery and literal armor.
I have to stop you there, because framing this entire era as him cowering behind a wall completely ignores the actual mechanics of the music.
How so?
Listen to the title track, Bad. That is not the sound of a man hiding. It is the sound of aggressive, unapologetic empowerment.
I disagree. It sounds like boasting to cover up insecurity.
No, look at the origin of the track. Michael originally wanted Bad to be a duet with Prince. It was supposed to be a heavyweight bout.
Right, but Prince walked away.
Because Prince balked at the opening lyric, "Your butt is mine." He walked away from the collaboration. Now, a less confident artist would have scrapped the song or, at least changed the lyric.
Sure.
But Michael didn't. He turned it into a solo anthem of street credibility. If you look at the musical architecture, the chord progression is actually a sophisticated variation of Ray Charles's Hit the Road Jack.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? He took a classic rhythm and blues foundation, fed it through that aggressive Synclavier, and delivered a vocal that blends the raw soul of James Brown with the sharp attack of a machine. I mean, it's upward mobility. It is pure swagger.
I hear you, but that aggression you're hearing, it's fear masquerading as power. If you want to talk about the reality of his mindset, we have to talk about Dirty Diana.
A great track.
You've previously framed that song as this brilliant hard rock crossover, right? Him bringing in Steve Stevens on guitar to, I guess, replicate the magic he had with Eddie Van Halen on Beat It.
Which it absolutely does. It proves he could still completely dominate rock radio.
Sonically, maybe, but lyrically? Let's look at the lyrics. Dirty Diana is a deeply dark, borderline misogynistic exploration of predatory groupies.
Misogynistic is a strong word.
He's singing about women who wait backstage in the shadows to trap musicians, manipulating them for fortune and fame. He is terrified of the very people who worship him. It is a portrait of a man who views human connection as a literal threat.
Well, Michael explicitly stated that Dirty Diana was just storytelling.
Storytelling?
Yes, it was based on the reality of living his entire life on the road since he was a child, observing how groupies operated around his brothers and other bands. You're projecting paranoia onto basic observation.
It is storytelling steeped entirely in paranoia. And if you want the ultimate proof of his isolation, we have to look at the absolute centerpiece of the album's psychological landscape. Smooth Criminal.
Which is a structural masterpiece.
But look at the structure. The track literally begins with the recorded sound of Michael's actual heartbeat.
Right.
He is dropping the listener straight into his own state of physiological panic. And what is the narrative he drops us into? A bloody apartment, a woman struck down in her bedroom. But here is the most morbid, revealing detail of that entire track. Do you know where the iconic hook actually comes from? The Annie, are you okay line that the entire world sings along to?
You mean the victim in the song's narrative?
Right, but Annie is the resuscit and CPR training dummy.
Wait, really?
Yes, the plastic mannequin used in basic life support classes. Annie, are you okay? Is a literal diagnostic phrase the instructor teaches you to say when checking for a victim's responsiveness.
Wow, he lifted the hook from a medical dummy?
Yes, let the gravity of that sit for a moment. The biggest pop star on the planet, tasked with writing a follow-up to the greatest album in human history, finds his most infectious hook by talking to a lifeless piece of plastic used for trauma resuscitation.
That's dark.
His mind is completely fixated on violence, panic, and medical revival, entirely removed from normal human interaction. The isolation required to find inspiration in a CPR dummy is staggering.
Look, I see the psychological angle you're playing there, and it's fascinating, but you are selectively focusing on the absolute darkest elements to paint him as a total recluse. If Bad is just a paranoid retreat into a bunker, how on earth you explain Man in the Mirror?
Well, it's an outlier. Quincy Jones had to fight to get it on the record.
But Michael chose to record it, and he delivered the vocal of his life on it. Co-written by Sciatta Garrett and Glenn Ballard, it is the ultimate outward-facing humanist pillar.
I'm not denying it's a good song.
He's looking at kids in the street with not enough to eat. He's looking at global humanitarian crises, and he's making a powerful gospel-infused call for personal moral responsibility. The inclusion of the Andrea Crouch Gospel Choir elevates it from a pop song to a spiritual anthem. It proves he was still deeply empathetically connected to global realities.
The message is beautiful, yes. But notice the mechanism of that change. I'm starting with the Man in the Mirror. It is still incredibly insular.
Oh, come on.
No, think about it. Even his grand plea for global unity is framed around a man standing completely alone in a room, singing to his own reflection. It underscores exactly what I'm saying. His only safe interaction was with himself.
I fundamentally disagree with that framing, because when you look beyond just the audio and examine the visual architecture of this era, you see how much he was reaching outward.
Visually?
Yes, he was expanding the very definition of what a pop star could be. He didn't just make music videos, he became a true cinematic architect. Look at the short film for Bad.
The Scorsese video.
Exactly. He hires Martin Scorsese to direct and Richard Price to write an 18-minute film. And it's not a vanity project. It brilliantly explores race, class, and urban tension.
True.
Michael plays a kid coming back from a private school, trying to prove he hasn't lost his street credibility to his old neighborhood gang, which was led by a young Wesley Snipes. And the choreography in that Brooklyn subway station by Greg Burge and Jeffrey Daniel?
Unbelievable choreography, yeah.
It was a direct, brilliant synthesis of urban street dancing and high Broadway art, specifically paying homage to the cool scene in West Side Story. He is acting as a cultural bridge.
I will never deny his command of the medium. Visually, it's stunning.
And Smooth Criminal takes it even further. It's a masterclass in visual homage to Fred Astaire's Girl Hunt Ballet from the Bandwagon, the 1930s underground club aesthetic, the white suit, the fedora. And he didn't just borrow from the past. He pushed the boundaries of physics. This is the era of the legendary anti-gravity lean.
Which again was a mechanical illusion.
But an illusion he engineered. He wanted to lean 45 degrees forward, past his center of gravity. You can't do that with wires in a live stadium setting. So how did he do it? He conceptually designed a system.
Right.
A specialized heel with a V-shaped slot and pegs that would mechanically rise through the stage floor at the exact right musical beat. He hooked in, defied gravity, slid out, and the pegs retracted. He later patented it. That is not the work of a man losing his grip. That is the work of an absolute visionary in total command of his craft.
But mechanical is the operative word here. Everything was engineered to keep the world at arm's length. You praise the wardrobe and the aesthetic, but that clothing, the heavy belts, the zippers, the military jackets, was designed by Michael Bush and Dennis Tompkins specifically to act as armor.
It was stage wear.
It interacted with his body to project this untouchable aura. And while you can argue he was utilizing ambiguity as a weapon, right? Blurring the lines of race and gender to become universal, the reality is that his strategy completely backfired. This was the exact era that birthed the Wacko Jacko tabloid phenomenon.
Because the media couldn't handle someone who didn't fit into their preconceived boxes.
No, because he was losing control of his own narrative. He or his camp were leaking bizarre stories to maintain a mystique, but it mutated into a monster.
Well,
the stories about trying to buy the Elephant Man's bones, sleeping in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber to live forever, his obsession with his pet chimpanzee, Bubbles. He built the shield so high that people stopped seeing a human being and started seeing a freak show.
but he heavily pushed back on those narratives. That's exactly why he included the song Leave Me Alone as a bonus track on the CD release of Bad. It was a direct, satirical attack on the media's obsession with him.
Leave Me Alone isn't a victory lap, though. It's proof of his exhausting, bitter frustration. Have you watched the video for that recently?
Of course.
It literally features him navigating this bizarre, claustrophobic amusement park made entirely out of his own tabloid rumors. He's dancing with the Elephant Man's bones. He is trapped in a cage of his own making. The media was weaponizing his physical transformation against him, and instead of humanizing himself, he just built the walls higher.
But that machine you say he built, it conquered the world. Let's step out of the psychology and focus on the undeniable empirical reality of the Bad era. The numbers are staggering.
Let's hear them.
The Bad World Tour was his first solo tour without his brothers. It spans 16 months. He played to 4.4 million people across 15 countries and grossed an unprecedented $125 million.
Sponsored by Pepsi.
Yes, and it completely shattered the existing paradigms of the live music industry.
Massive numbers, yes. But at what cost?
Let me explain how massive, because the technology is crucial here too. He wasn't just standing on a stage. He traveled with 700 automated lights. In 1987, the concept of intelligent, computer-controlled moving light fixtures on a stadium tour of that scale was practically science fiction.
Yeah, it was huge.
He had 40 lasers. He had outfits wired with fiber optics. He brought a level of theatrical engineering to stadiums that simply did not exist before him. And more importantly, it was the absolute zenith of his physical capability.
If he listens to the live recordings from Wembley Stadium in 1988, he is singing with a ferocious, attacking energy.
He was incredible live. I won't deny that.
He is hitting notes while dancing at a pace that he would rarely replicate on later tours, where, playback became a bit more necessary. He wasn't crumbling. He was an athlete operating at the absolute peak of human performance.
He was performing brilliantly, yes. But think about the incredibly heavy toll that crown was taking on him. You say he conquered the world, but the world didn't actually see it that way.
What do you mean?
Yes, the tour broke records. Yes, the album sold around 35 million copies. But we have to look at the cultural context of 1988. Do you know how the industry viewed 35 million copies?
They called it a disappointment, which is just absurd.
It is absurd, but it's true. The media and the industry deemed 35 million copies a failure simply because it wasn't the 70 million of Thriller. He was being judged against an impossible phantom metric, that 100 million he wrote on his mirror.
Right.
The pressure he put on himself was matched by the impossible expectations of the public. And the ultimate tragic proof of this industry fatigue came at the 1988 Grammy Awards,
which produced one of the greatest television performances in the history of the medium.
He delivered the performance of a lifetime, the vocal arrangement, the sheer physical exertion of the choreography for The Way You Make Me Feel, transitioning into the gospel explosion of Men in the Mirror. He dropped to his knees. He literally stopped the world. He was nominated for 4 major awards that night, including Album of the Year.
And he went home completely empty-handed.
Completely empty-handed. He lost Album of the Year to U2's The Joshua Tree, despite the 5 consecutive Billboard #1 singles, a record that stood for decades, by the way.
Yeah.
Despite the 35 million albums sold, the Recording Academy completely shut him out. Why? It wasn't about the music. That snub is heavily interpreted by experts as the industry deciding they were fundamentally tired of his ubiquity.
They were fatigued.
Exactly. They were tired of him buying the Beatles publishing catalog, tired of the tabloid circus, tired of the shifting face and the buckles. No matter how undeniable his talent was on that stage, no matter how perfectly he executed his pop manifesto, they refused to crown him again. That night in 1988 marks the tragic realization that no amount of perfection could ever satisfy the beast he had created.
I completely disagree that it was a tragedy. It might have been a disappointment for him that night, sure, but time is the ultimate judge.
Is it?
Absolutely. The fact that we are still analyzing the precise sonic architecture of the Synclavier on Bad or the mechanical physics of the Lean in Smooth Criminal proves the enduring superiority of the work. When you strip away the impossible expectations of 1987 and the tabloid noise, Bad remains Jackson's true creative zenith.
Well,
He proved he didn't need Quincy Jones to hold his hand. He commandeered the absolute latest in digital technology to construct a flawless, record-breaking body of work. He was the architect of his own empire.
and I maintain that Bad is a haunting masterpiece precisely because it captures the king of pop right at the tipping point. It is the sound of a brilliant but profoundly tragic figure encasing his trauma and his crushing isolation within a militaristic pop machine. He used technology not just to innovate, but to insulate. He created an aggressive, paranoid sonic world because that is exactly how he felt the real world was treating him.
It really forces you to acknowledge the incredible complexity of his life at that moment. I mean, he could simultaneously dictate the technological and visual terms of the entire music industry while feeling the immense, suffocating weight of his own crown.
Exactly. I think anyone listening to this needs to go back and revisit these tracks with fresh ears. Listen past the flawless pop hooks. Listen to the coldness of those synthesizers. Listen to the frantic heartbeat in Smooth Criminal, and really hear the intense psychological drama playing out underneath the surface. There is just so much more to explore in how he constructed these songs.
I couldn't agree more. We'll leave it to the listener to decide whether Bad is the sound of total artistic liberation or the intricate design of a magnificent cage. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.